feedback, questions. Oh, you guys look beautiful. I was sitting there, I didn't see you all.
Ted and I were talking earlier, and I said, you knew Jack Mezirow, and share a little bit with us. And he said, well, I can tell you he wasn't a goody-goody. So maybe you could expand on that statement.
Oh, you're bad.
What was the question?
The question was, I'm sure he wasn't a goody two-shoes. Jack was a dear friend, really was. I think other people experienced him in quite different ways. I would be hugely positive. I came here in '78 and I was gone in 1980. I was gone in a year and 10 months with a master's and a doctorate. It was him that did it, in the sense that he was hugely encouraging. He never wrote anything on anything I wrote except excellent. It taught me a lot. There were many mistakes in what I wrote. There were many errors from typos up and down. He never pointed out any of them. I think his ability just to be positive about someone struggling to understand Freire. However, I do know there's another side, and I know other people have different experiences of Jack that are not as happy as that. I handed in a chapter every month from January to May of a thesis, and he simply said, why haven't you the next one done? I don't know why that happened. I think I promised to get out very quickly. I think that may have been it. But we did get on well together. It is a huge pleasure to be as close to someone as that, and his family, and Andy, and Ed.D, and mine. That's a huge privilege. And part of remembering him here, and I know I'm talking to people who also knew him as well as that, and will treasure that. So it's like, and that's not just true of him. It's a moment to think of other people who are important in your learning life, not just Jack and me, but you and whoever is your mentor, or someone who who wants to be a friend of your mind and hear you. Hear your deepest desires about learning and what you really want to know and do. So it's a celebration of that. And to have experienced that from anyone is just a treasure. Does that?
Other thoughts? And the mic is on now.
So Ted, I wonder how Haneth would interpret Trump.
Interpret? How would he interpret?
Donald Trump and the larger moment that we're experiencing in our country.
Yes, I think he'd be very clear, very, very clear. It's not right of Europeans, is it, Stephen or Pepe? Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. We shouldn't comment on the American political scene. However, when I see Donald Trump, I remember your other great character, the Great Gatsby. And I remember some of the lines towards the end of the Great Gatsby where Pat and Daisy Buchanan, were left with the two of them. And they walked away from this mess and left other people to clear up their mess. I can't remember, I'd love to remember the quote exactly, but they left other people to clear up their mess. And I suspect that Haneth would recognize in Donald Trump a great Gatsby. And the question is, where is his great, magnificent pink house? We just call it Trump something. And I should stop this. Sorry, Stephen. Does that make sense? And yes, I have one more thought, and it's from Haneth. He would see that neoliberal capitalism and that iteration of capitalism is loaded with misrecognition. It's defining flaw. It's defining pathology. is misrecognition. It's not to recognize. It's to put something above people. Profit, money, whatever, power. I'm sorry I forgot that bit. It's over to you, Oprah.
Thank you very much. When you speak of misrecognition,
Yes.
does it imply that there's prior to that, a sense of true recognition or true identity? And if so, then how does one form that first truer or more authentic sense of identity such that they know when they're being misrecognized?
I would love to be able to short reference your answer very quickly and say, boldly is your answer. All moments when people are put down or not recognized or criticized or even called names or ignored or abused, or a whole load of things that you know about, they're moments of misrecognition. All of this goes back to the beginning. And some people, when they're born, are not recognized at all. It's hugely tragic. It's probably catastrophic. None of us are probably recognized totally and entirely and perfectly. The only question is, are we sufficiently recognized in order to survive the panic of childhood and infancy, or the fear that we might be left alone? And Bowlby is your touchstone there, to go back and try to understand how a young child sits on a mother's lap and basically explores the world from there, provided the lap remains a secure place from which to depart and return. And their fears and threats are heard, listened to, and empathetically understood. This is the beginning of empathy, when a mother understands when the child is upset or can't meet their Uncle Jack who is coming in the door. It's not an answer, but it's where to find that answer. It's to the beginning. Yes.
I'm inspired by the thought of collectively resolving our disorienting dilemma, and I'm curious, have you done any work, or do you know if Jack's done any work around groups kind of having a subconscious assumption or mental model that is challenged, not just as individuals who are resolved through the other, but actually as a group from the beginning of the process all the way through?
You're asking whether Jack or other people have looked at groups as a vehicle for. Sure, of course.
So building on Beyond's work or others who looked at the collective subconscious of the group, has that been integrated with transformative learning?
Sure. I can remember when I was a student here doing a Bion, the Europeans call them Bion, I think, but Bion, Wilfred Bion is who you're talking about, is the A.K. Rice Institute is the name that I remember. Now, whether it's still, you're nodding, so do you understand what you understand? And there have been links between the two. Like Jack would always have suggested, I think, to people who are interested to go the A.K. Rice Institute. That's just one example. There will be others. Other people who were here with him longer will know how other areas in which he was interested.
Yeah,
Yes.
One remark and one question. One remark regarding the question of Victoria about Mr. Trump. You mentioned earlier how for some people going back to adult ed or higher ed is fulfilling a quest for recognition. I guess for some people going to the White House may be a kind of an attempt to fulfill a need for recognition, I guess. I don't know. Now, more seriously, you made a remark earlier that intrigued me about connecting disorienting dilemma and the struggle for recognition. And I was wondering, I'm facilitating a life history seminar here at TC and working on the biography of a student, an African-American woman. She was mentioning how she experienced, she had the privilege as a child to get a scholarship to go into a private school where she was among the 1% African-American students in the school. And so she experienced through the conflict, the racism that she was confronted to, and her experience growing up, being successful in school, a kind of struggle between what she said as, in a way, paraphrase her, being too black for the kids around her who were expressing, who were discriminating her, and not being black enough in regard of her own family members and her community, who was seeing her as, in a way, betraying their values by going into that privileged institution. And so I was wondering how, if we could see, or if Annette wrote about conflict of recognition, because somewhere she was not recognized by the kids she was in school with, but she was not fully recognized neither by some members of her community. So I was wondering if that's something that Annette talked about, and if we could relate that to disorienting dilemma.
I think the first comment is the easier one. You know, you can pursue misplaced recognition. I suspect that could be. I'm also interested, as almost like a preamble, my thought process is thinking of the gaffe that Trump has made about the Mexican judge, or the judge of Mexican origin, and the kind of, would you say, that even Fox News are displaying a level of discomfort. Is that? I also think the issue you raise, it's never clear, you know, to talk about who's recognizing whom, or to know who's being not recognized. And someone is more someone is more Irish than someone else. These are not easy things to figure out. You know, you could take it out of the race issue, and I could bring it into my own world and wonder, you know, is someone who wants a particular kind of Ireland more Irish than someone who wants another kind? And to some extent, one of the big dilemmas of the history between Ireland and England has been our ability to resolve those dilemmas to some extent. So it's like these are opportunities for transformative learning and change. Do you hear me trying to think it out on my feet? But it's like I don't think that Hannah would easily lead to us judging people or agreeing with one or the other. I also think that Jack would be very encouraging of people to make that issue more complex even than you present it before we go to understand it at all, or as part of the understanding of it. You know, to pick it apart. That the first response is not to answer it. The first response is really to make it more complex. It's part of all our understandings. It's something we all do to some extent. I better stop before it looks like I'm floundering.
Thank you, Ted. I think some of your sort of thinking out loud is helping me a little bit with the question that I'm kind of noodling in my head. And that is that, you know, the major theme of what you're discussing is, of course, intersubjectivity, right?
Yes.
Which is not an individual phenomenon, right? But so if we put that up against recognition, you know, which to me, when I listen to you and my very limited understanding of what Hannah means by it, it's the recognition of the individual spirit and the identity. And so I'm feeling sort of a paradox or a contradiction between the intersubjective and the recognition, which is, you know, highly individualized, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the recognition piece of that.
Probably misunderstanding neither. it's an interesting question. I think what I'm trying to have fun with and play with is how far back can you push this idea that recognition is the core thing. It's the most important thing in our development. Without it, we're not going anywhere. There won't be intersubjectivity without recognition. Like the mother has to, or whoever is taking care, or whoever is the attachment figure for the infant, before the infant is an individual at all. I remember talking to you, Peter, about this maybe at a previous conference. Before the infant is an individual, before there can be no intersubjectivity, the mother recognizes something. And you're forcing me to think it out on my feet, which is interesting as well. But I think the recognition is the key thing, the fundamental thing, really. And it predates intersubjectivity. Yes, the parent recognizing the child. And the child will have experiences and will have feelings, or pre-feelings or pre-thoughts, will certainly have an experience of being safe, of having their needs met.
So extrapolate that into the real life.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
It's still a
You could also imagine, this mightn't be fair to think about it, but I could play with the idea for a minute. If someone is in a really bad situation in a drug treatment program, and you begin to wonder if they're there at all, or what can be saved, or whether there can be intersubjectivity. You know, those questions arise. And however you answer that question, I don't know. But I do know you can recognize. Peter Allen? Yes. Peter, yes. 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 He also, Peter worked with myself and Pepe. He was the German researcher on our European project. And he did a fascinating piece on dementia and music. You're aware of that?
And in that book, well, not in that book, but
Yes.
in speaking to him about the book, what he
Yes.
said is that in Mead's terms, that he was
Yes.
thinking what was going on,
Yes.
was that people with dementia had lost their me,
Yes, exactly.
their other.
Yes, you're quoting Peter. Peter Alheit, if people are wondering who we're talking about here. Yes, that's an interesting, yeah. That's not an answer, that's just a conversation that, and other people should join in that conversation.
Well, I'll join in that
Yes.
conversation.
Yes.
So, sort of building on from what was said, it seems like the way recognition is framed is to reduce an asymmetry of power. So the recognition is given as a nurturing and affirmative and supportive act that allows someone to participate more fully in discourse, civil society, and so on. So I'm kind of interested too, as the previous question was, about this power dimension to it, because if we go back to Trump, so we have a racist bully who has economic power of capital, who has media power by having his very productive deals with NBC, and who now has access maybe to real political power. So when I'm thinking about giving recognition to Trump, I absolutely don't want to recognize him. I want to destroy him rather than recognize him. So it seems like in that situation, the power has been kind of inverted, and so we sort of need less recognition in that instance. I wonder how you feel about that. And then the other thing is that I think of times in my life when I've sought to avoid recognition of who I really am. So I suffer from mental illness, like a lot of people in this chapel. So I have clinical depression, and I'm on a permanent regime of medication that deals with this. But for many years, the idea that that would be recognized and supported was complete anathema to me. I wanted politically to hide it. I hid it interpersonally from my own kids. Really, the only person who knew was my wife. So I'm thinking, well, are there times when recognition is legitimately avoided? So maybe I've misunderstood the nature of recognition as you're framing it from Hannah's work. So those are sort of a couple of thoughts buzzing around.
Can I buzz out loud on the beginning bit, at least? Because it seems to be hugely appropriate that there is a huge disparity of power between parent and infant. But it's not necessary that recognition involves this disparity always. I think some of the most important moments of recognition are between people who have the same power. I think a husband and wife who think their way through some mental health issues will do that heroically for each other. And you can talk about differentials of power, but does it matter? Or maybe there are, or maybe there aren't, but you can see that even in positions of equality of power, recognition might even be more powerful as a support and developmentally. And someone else wants to come in on that, because
I got it.
Julie.
Okay. Thank you for remarks. I feel I've learned a lot again from your sharing. So my question is about first. It has a few steps. The first step is what's the difference between identity formation and personal or professional development? And I ask this. I'm coming from. I encountered recognition, the concept of recognition in your writing, but my extensive reading, trying to understand the concept further, comes from reading of Axel Hannah, who uses the language for moral philosophy, I guess, or political science in a way. So I found, also I sat in a critical theories class at Uni Theological Seminary, so I found the two fields treat the concept hugely different. So for us, for adult educators, it's really about developing the individuals in a way. And for them, when recognition comes into picture, the first reaction they have is identity politics. So which is all of a sudden turns into garnering power, and maybe could be in a manipulative way. So I feel, in a way, I'm torn, and I wanted to be able to work with them and feel for adult educators who maybe have some passion in social action, that I need to work with them, that I need to communicate with them. So I'm trying to make meaning out of all this, I guess. I hope I'm making sense here. Thank you.
You know, I hate to do this. I have a few people who still want to comment, and someone tells me that adult beverages beckon. So what should we do? Should we keep this going, or should we go for adult beverages? Go on, right?
Well, you can keep it going with beverages.
You're going to keep it going. You should ask Claudia what she wants for Christmas.
Thank you for recognizing my question is, I'm listening to the action that you're talking about, the intersubjectivity that you address, and recognition. And to me, those concepts are seminal in the work of Martin Buber.
Yes. I agree.
And so
I agree.
it's asked to leave out
Yes.
a comment on the sort of progenitor of this thinking. I think is something that I'd like to hear you correct, and maybe I'd like to hear what you have to say about how Huber thinks of this.
It's impossible to read Honneth without thinking of Martin Buber. Well, I and thou, is a phrase that captures so much of what Honneth is about. When he talks about recognition, I would agree. Oh, not everything. No, like when I read Honneth or Mezirow or Habermas, other things jump into my mind. Buber is certainly one of them.
Hi.
It's like you obviously understand what Buber is about.
Yes.
And you're suggesting that there is a connection.
Oh, I was going to say the same thing.
I agree.
But he would agree with that. That he really utilized and incorporated many viewpoints, Freud, Hegel, everything. He incorporated.
See, it's always worth going back. All these people are key informants, including Martin Buber. It would be worth going back and reading them. It would be worth going back and reading Berger and Luckman, Goffman. There are all sorts of people that would be worth going back to look at now and see how could you pull them through what has happened in the last 50 years. It would be a nice essay.
Hi.
Stephen. We're going to do Stephen, one more, and then I have to call. John's already given a look.
Can I just very quickly answer, because we can get back to this later in the week. I think the question about is it identity formation or professional development, the answer is up here somewhere. It's can we not do this with drink? It's like the most useful answer is rarely one or the other. The best answer is often why can we not bring both of them together? Structure and agency, thought and action, identity, professional development. Why can we not think of ways in which these are connected rather than drink and work?
Go ahead.
Hi. Over here.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Stephen Nishida. I'm a member of the current AEGIS cohort. Speaking of intersubjectivity, I've recently been reading up on team learning. And during your talk, I recalled when I read your 2014 article, I remember thinking to myself in looking at Honneth's work that the forms of recognition that came about in the positive sense may have had perhaps less of an impact as the forms of disrespect, it seemed to me, in terms of the way that the forms of disrespect became manifest as damaged relationship with the self and with the social surroundings, if I understood you correctly.
Yes.
And in reading up recently on team learning, I'm reading Amy Edmondson and people who are talking a lot about psychological safety these days. And at first it didn't click, but hearing you today and looking back at how this psychological safety has been defined as a sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up, it seemed to me that there's a pretty strong parallel there, and I wonder if that was something that you had seen before and whether I'm barking up the right tree.
Certainly barking, which is great. Well, I'm pleased that you're thinking in that way. That makes sense, the way you explain it there. And I think, yes, yes, I should stop then.
I just thought I'd maybe help wrap this up a little bit, because you started talking about once a teacher understands transformative learning, it's sort of impossible to not reference it.
Yes.
And when you spoke of recognition tonight, as a teacher, I couldn't help, and my dissertation topic has to do with spirituality and education, think about teachers who have gone through their own transformation different styles of transformation, how they've learned to really deeply recognize their students, and that's perhaps the biggest act of enhancing transformation in their own students that they can make.
So folks, let's keep this dialogue.
Can I just acknowledge that question, Taj, for 1 second? Because the recognition is a precursor. It's the necessary foundation for critical reflection, engagement in society, involvement in democracy. Just in case that nexus wasn't in your mind when you said that. Aren't these awful moments, because they're so only, it's very hard to have a conversation, isn't it? Because I need to know so much more when people speak. And I've ignored one or two even as they said something.
I was intrigued, the concept of recognition you talked a lot about with infants, and what relationship do you see with the extensive research has been done on attachment theory?
That's exactly what I'm referring to, is Bowlby's work and Ainsworth and all of that work about you see, if you praise a child, if you tell a child how wonderful they are and that you like the way they play the piano, you can actually see them grow in front of you. They capture your moment of praise and recognition. The problem with that is that as adults we forget and we block out what that does for us. That it does precisely the same, and it's precisely as developmental as that for us. Whether it's laws that acknowledge our uniqueness or our inequality or our rights, or whether it's at work, that someone at work congratulates us or recognizes what we've done. And it's only when we look at the opposite and see how someone can be ignored or talked about behind their back that these things are so destructive. And all of these things are a piece. And Bowlby talked about the pursuit of attachment is a lifelong process. So is the struggle for recognition, in my view. Because you can only set these things up for me to hear your question. And that moment of recognition even is hugely important. And it's almost impossible to do it here, partly because of the differentials of power. And someone will struggle to recognize someone's question or what's going on. I'm trying to be reflective about the moment.
I'll make another one of my probably naive remarks. It just occurs to me so much of what's been said about Donald Trump makes me have a sort of meta thought about all this, which my suspicion is that Trump is not only a propagator of misrecognition, but almost certainly is a product of it. And I think about when you were talking about a child on his mother's lap or her mother's lap, that the natural response without recognition is what's called reptilian response. It's, to attack, to be afraid, to have to be right, to all kinds of other things. And in relation to critical thinking, I think, and recognition, it seems to me what is key about it is the ability to welcome what is not me. And that means me has to be secure enough to welcome that. In terms of what Stephen said, though, I don't think that means you have to concur with it, but you have to recognize its essential humanity. And I think only that kind of mutual recognition between people is what enables humane discourse.
Oh, there's a problem with Trump, isn't there? So I've noticed.
The problem with all of them.
maybe the obvious problem with Trump, it seems to me, is that he is so unable to recognize other people in their diversity and their uniqueness, whether you're Mexican or Islam or Muslim. He is so unable to recognize. The question arises for me is, how did he get there? How did he get there? What history would he tell? What story would he tell that goes way back? How does one become as feral as that in one's life, in one's relationships, in one's business? Anyway, stop.
You all are wonderful. Let's recognize Ted for this very nice evening. I normally do it with a namaste. And, as Ted said, this doesn't happen easily. You don't do this by yourself. So there are lots of people to thank. This seemed like a really hard evening to put together until we met Alejandra Mhereb from the Office of Alumni Relations. And it suddenly became easy. And by the way, for their inspiration, Jeannie, Lyle, and Victoria, always. And I have to tell you one more thing. We didn't have a lot of energy until we met the folks from OLA. And they just shot some adrenaline to us. Julia, Stephen, and it's great that you guys are here with us too, all of you. Thank you so much. And I just want to say, also thank all those folks that are donating to Aegis for Life. Keep doing it. We're going to keep this going. We'll have this next year. Please respond to the feedback. There will be some critical incident questionnaire that'll come in your mail. Let's send that back so we can keep this going, and let's adult beverages beckon us. So let's go and keep the conversation going. Thank you. Thank you, Ted.